Menglong case retrial. 11 killers face maximum sentence. Fans explode with joy. What kind of verdict could turn grief into celebration and transform a courtroom into the stage of history? The shocking retrial has delivered the harshest possible punishment, and the reaction is nothing short of explosive. Justice has spoken. But the story is far from over. Let's join Red Carpet Reveal to uncover the full truth, right now. The morning of the retrial was unlike any other day in recent memory. Crowds had gathered outside the courthouse long before dawn, their breath visible in the chill air, their banners raised high, their voices murmuring with a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Some had camped overnight, determined not to miss a single moment of what was being called the most important trial of the decade. The Menglong case. A name that had once symbolized celebrity, charisma, and artistic brilliance, had transformed into a symbol of justice delayed, corruption exposed, and now, finally, reckoning. 11 killers, long shielded by a system that many claimed was bent and broken, were about to face judgment once more. The people waited not only for a verdict but for vindication, and they would not be denied. What kind of verdict could turn grief into celebration? What kind of judgment could transform years of outrage into tears of joy? These were the questions pulsing in the air as television crews set up their cameras, as social media influencers went live to hundreds of thousands of followers, as families of victims clutched photographs and pressed them close to their chests. The retrial had been forced into existence by an unstoppable wave of public anger, a tidal surge of petitions, protests, and unrelenting demands for fairness. Ordinary people had refused to stay silent. Voices had shaken the pillars of power. Today, those same voices gathered once more to witness history unfold. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy, as though the walls themselves carried the memory of injustice. Judges sat with steely faces, eyes betraying no emotion. Yet the gravity of their task was clear. On the left side, the families of the victims filled the benches, expressions etched with grief but also with something new, hope. Some clutched rosaries or charms. Some held each other's trembling hands. All of them united by the unbearable memory of lives lost. On the right side sat the accused, 11 men whose names had been splashed across headlines. Their faces now pale and drawn. Stripped of arrogance. Stripped of defiance. They were no longer shadows moving untouchable through society, they were criminals about to face the full weight of justice. Menglong himself was not on trial for murder. His name, however, had become forever entangled with the case. His reputation hung in the balance with every word spoken in the courtroom. He had once been the nation's golden idol, adored by millions. Yet his name now carried connotations of betrayal and scandal. His case symbolized not just the actions of a man but the rot within a system that allowed powerful figures to evade true accountability. This retrial was more than punishment for 11 killers. It was a test of whether society could correct its own failures. The prosecution rose to speak. A hush fell over the courtroom. The lead prosecutor's voice was calm yet cutting, outlining the crimes with meticulous detail. Each act of violence was described, each victim named. Their stories told not as statistics but as lives stolen too soon. Jury and judges listened, grim-faced, as the narrative unfolded like a tapestry of horror. For hours, the courtroom was forced to relive the nightmare that had first shocked the nation. But this time, there was a difference. This time, the weight of public outrage pressed down on every word, demanding that justice not only be seen but be delivered without compromise. Outside, the crowd hung on every update transmitted through phones and live feeds. Cheers erupted when the prosecution unveiled damning evidence. Gasps spread when graphic details were recounted. At times, the air vibrated with chants, "Justice! Justice!" their voices reaching the windows of the courtroom itself. Fans who had once idolized Menglong now demanded answers. Their posters painted not with his image but with slogans of accountability. It was a transformation so complete it seemed surreal. An entertainer's name had become shorthand for both betrayal and hope. For injustice endured and justice awaited. Defense lawyers attempted to argue for leniency, their voices measured but their words falling flat against a tide of emotion. They pointed to flaws in evidence, to the killer's supposed remorse, to the years already spent in custody. Yet their arguments rang hollow in the ears of those who had suffered and those who had fought for this retrial. No excuse could erase the brutality of the crimes. No plea could outweigh the rivers of blood spilled. The courtroom buzzed with restless energy, as though everyone inside and outside knew that leniency was no longer an option. The turning point came when witnesses were called to the stand. Who had lost sons, fathers who had buried daughters, siblings who had grown up with empty chairs at the dinner table, they each walked forward with trembling steps, voices shaking, eyes burning with both sorrow and resolve. They recounted the last phone calls, the haunting silences, the sleepless nights filled with nightmares. Their testimony struck deeper than any legal argument could. Tears streamed down faces across the courtroom, even among the hardened journalists who had covered countless tragedies. For a moment, the killers looked down at their shackled hands, their bravado stripped away by the sheer force of human grief. The proceedings stretched over days, yet the intensity never waned. Each session ended with the crowd outside swelling larger, their chants louder, their anticipation more electric. Social media became a battlefield of emotions, with hashtags trending globally, memes, fan edits, emotional tributes to the victims, and fiery demands for justice flooded timelines. International media picked up the story, portraying it as a moment of reckoning not only for Menglong but for a justice system under siege by the very people it had failed. By the final day, the courthouse felt like a volcano on the brink of eruption. Everyone knew the verdict was imminent. Security had been heightened. Ambulances stood on alert. Nothing could prepare the nation for the explosion of emotion that was about to unfold. The judges withdrew to deliberate, leaving the courtroom in a tension so thick it was suffocating. The killers whispered nervously among themselves, their faces pale as paper. Families clutched each other more tightly, prayers spilling from trembling lips. Porters sent urgent updates, their words tumbling with barely restrained excitement. And then, the judges returned. The room fell silent. The kind of silence that presses against the skin, that makes the heart pound so loudly it drowns out every other sound. The chief judge's gaze swept across the courtroom, stern and unflinching. The killers trembled. Families held their breath. The entire nation leaned in. This was the moment they had been waiting for, not for days, not for months, but for years. The moment when injustice would finally be confronted. The judge's voice was steady as he began to read the verdict. The crimes were reiterated, the suffering acknowledged, the failures of the past trial condemned. And then, the words the nation had demanded, the maximum sentence, applied to all 11 killers. The courtroom erupted. Cries of relief and grief mingled in the air. Families collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing with both sorrow and joy. The killers shouted in protest, some fainting, staring in blank disbelief as their futures were sealed. Journalists shouted into cameras, their voices shaking with adrenaline. And outside, the crowd exploded into cheers so loud they seemed to shake the very foundations of the courthouse. Banners were waved, tears streamed down faces. Strangers embraced one another and screamed with the uncontainable ecstasy of vindication. Justice had been delivered, and they were there to witness it. For a nation long plagued by doubt and cynicism, it was more than a verdict. It was proof that voices mattered, that persistence could overcome corruption. Truth could triumph over lies. Menglong's case, once a symbol of despair, become a symbol of victory. The retrial had not only punished killers but had restored faith in justice itself. And yet, even amid the celebration, one question lingered in the air: was this the end? Merely the beginning of a deeper reckoning? The moment the words maximum sentence left the judge's lips, history seemed to split in two. Inside the courtroom, time slowed to a crawl. 11 killers, smug and untouchable, now sat frozen, their faces drained of color, their bodies trembling as the weight of the verdict crashed upon them. Some broke down, shouting curses and pleading for mercy. Others fell silent, stunned into numb disbelief. Bells clinked as they slumped in their seats, their futures obliterated by a justice they never believed would come. On the other side of the courtroom, the air erupted into chaos of a different kind. Families of victims sobbed openly, their tears no longer only of grief but of long-delayed vindication. Mothers who had buried their children clutched photographs and kissed them through floods of tears. Fathers pressed their faces into their hands, shaking as though the verdict had lifted a mountain from their shoulders. Brothers, sisters, friends, all those who had carried pain for years, let out cries that mingled sorrow and relief. A sound so raw that even the judges blinked away moisture from their eyes. The journalists leapt into action, their voices cracking as they shouted into cameras. Historic verdict delivered. All 11 killers sentenced to maximum punishment in the Menglong case. Their words spread like wildfire across networks, amplified by countless social media streams. Within minutes, hashtags surged to the top of global trends. Of weeping families and collapsing killers flooded timelines. The world was not merely witnessing a trial, it was watching a nation erupt in a cathartic release of fury, grief, and triumph. Outside the courthouse, that had waited for hours, some for days, exploded into chants and cheers. The sound was deafening. Of human voices rising into the sky, echoing across city blocks. Fans who once adored Menglong now shouted for justice, waving banners painted with slogans of victory. Strangers embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Firecrackers burst into the air as though to punctuate the moment. The courthouse steps became a sea of people chanting, singing, screaming with the ecstasy of those who had fought and finally won. A strange sight to outsiders, the fall of killers celebrated like the victory of a national sports team. But for those who had lived through years of betrayal and cover-ups, more than a legal verdict, it was redemption. It was the reclaiming of dignity stolen by corruption. That no power, no fame, no manipulation could hold back the truth forever. Fans who had once filled arenas with screams for their idol now filled streets with screams for justice. The transformation was total, unstoppable. International media quickly picked up the story. Justice at last, read headlines from New York to London, from Tokyo to Paris. Analysts compared the trial to other historic moments when public pressure had bent systems toward fairness. Commentators marveled at the power of fan communities, once dismissed as shallow or frivolous, now revealed as engines of social change. The world watched in awe as ordinary citizens, united by outrage and determination, had toppled a wall of injustice and demanded a new era of accountability. But not everyone celebrated. Killers' families. Despair spread like poison. Mothers of the condemned screamed in anguish, begging the judges to reconsider. Siblings fainted in the courtroom, overcome by the shock of seeing their loved ones condemned to the harshest fate. Guards restrained relatives who attempted to rush forward, cries drowned out by the roar of celebration outside. The killers themselves, faces twisted in horror, realized that no plea, no excuse, no clever trick could save them now. The fall was complete, and they would forever be remembered not for who they were but for the horrors they had committed. The symbolism of the Menglong case only grew in the days that followed. What had begun as a tragedy had become a battle. What had ended as a retrial was now remembered as a revolution. Citizens spoke of it as proof that justice could be reclaimed, that corruption could be overturned, that the power of people's voices could shatter even the strongest shields of privilege. The name Menglong, once gilded with glamour, became etched into history as a turning point, the case that forced a nation to confront itself and change. Fans continued to pour into the streets long after the verdict, waving flags, holding vigils, even singing songs once performed by Menglong, now transformed into anthems of resilience. They celebrated not him, but the victory of truth over illusion, the triumph of justice over manipulation. Emotional tributes filled television screens, montages of victims' faces, interviews with tearful families, reports of how communities had rallied for years to keep the memory of injustice alive until this day. For a generation that had grown up under the shadow of this case, the verdict was more than a legal conclusion, it was a personal liberation. Yet, amid the joy, a deeper question loomed. Had justice truly been done? Could any sentence, even the maximum, truly repay the years stolen, the lives lost and endured? Families admitted that closure was elusive. Justice is not the same as healing, one grieving mother said to reporters, clutching her son's photo. But at least now, the world heard us. At least now, we are not invisible. Her words resonated across broadcasts, a reminder that while the killer's punishment was necessary, it could never undo the tragedy that had brought them here. Politicians scrambled to align themselves with the public mood, promising reforms to prevent such failures from happening again. Laws were reviewed, loopholes examined. Officials who had once blocked justice were quietly removed from positions of power. Legal experts debated whether the retrial was the product of proper procedure or the pressure of mass outrage. But few could deny the result. The system had been forced to listen, The Menglong case had rewritten not only its own history but the trajectory of the nation's justice system. For Menglong himself, fallout was catastrophic. His once untouchable image was now ashes. Endorsements collapsed overnight. His projects were shelved. His name, once cheered in concert halls, was now spat with contempt in streets. Though he had not stood in the dock beside the killers, the weight of his association with the case dragged him into the abyss. He became a symbol not of stardom but of betrayal, of fame but of failure. His silence in the days after the verdict only deepened the suspicion, the anger, the disgust. Where once fans defended him with ferocity, they demanded answers he could not give. The killers, meanwhile, awaited their fate in cold cells, stripped of illusions. Once so brazen, had dissolved into despair. Some raged against the verdict. Others wept uncontrollably. All of them knew the truth. Their names were destroyed forever. They would not be remembered as men but as monsters. By history as much as by the court. The days turned into weeks. Yet the fever of the retrial did not fade. Documentaries were announced, were written overnight. Talk shows debated the meaning of the verdict. Teachers discussed it in classrooms. Artists painted murals of justice rising from the ashes of corruption. The case had transcended crime and punishment. It had become culture. A story passed from mouth to mouth, and to outlive the generation that had witnessed it. And still, in quiet moments, a question lingered in the hearts of many. Could the system truly change? Or was this victory only temporary? Would the next tragedy be met with silence again? Or had the people truly awakened to their power? The verdict had ended one story, but it had also ignited another, an unfinished narrative of accountability, vigilance, and courage. The Menglong case retrial will be remembered not only for the sentencing of 11 killers but for the explosion of human emotion that surrounded it. Fans, once marked for their obsession, proven their strength. Families, once silenced, had forced the world to listen. A nation, once cynical, had discovered its voice again. And though the wounds of the past may never fully heal, the legacy of this trial will endure as a beacon, a warning, and a promise. The killers are gone. Their power stripped. Their illusion shattered. Menglong's name, forever changed, stands now not as an idol's banner but as a reminder of what can happen when truth is denied too long. And the fans, those countless voices that rose in unison, remain the true victors of this story. Their joy was not born only of vengeance but of the undeniable triumph of persistence. Proof that even the most ordinary voices can bring extraordinary change. The retrial ended with chains clinking and tears falling, cheers rising and headlines blazing. But in truth, it was more than an ending. It was a beginning, the start of a new era where justice must answer not to power but to people. And as the echoes of celebration faded into the night, truth remained certain. The Menglong case will never be forgotten. The retrial of the Menglong case was never just about 11 killers. It was about a nation's demand for justice. Voices that refused to be silenced. About families who carried unbearable grief until the world was finally forced to listen. The maximum sentence delivered inside that courtroom will be remembered not only as a legal judgment but as a turning point, proof that truth can prevail, even when buried beneath years of denial. Victims, justice has spoken. For the people, faith has been restored. And for history, day will stand as a reminder that no amount of power, fame, manipulation can outlast the voice of a united crowd. Thank you for joining Red Carpet Revealed on this unforgettable journey into the heart of scandal, suffering, and ultimate triumph. Your time, your attention, and your passion are what keep us uncovering the truths others dare to hide. Stay with us, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll never miss the next explosive revelation. The red carpet has been rolled back, and the truth is always waiting to be revealed.